today's video, I want to talk about why the Nazis didn't have any victims. And this is obviously a very controversial statement. Will probably be taken out of context by a lot of people, but I don't really care. I'm going to talk about it anyway. And to be clear, I'm not saying that what the Nazis did was right, or that I agree with it, or that there wasn't horrible suffering and that a bunch of people were not victimized by pure evil during the Holocaust. Okay, this is not a question of, this is not a discussion about the ethics of the Holocaust or of genocide or of Hitler or Nazism or anything like that. Okay, Nazi is just an example for the point that I'm going to be making in this video. So, in order to understand this point, we first have to take a look at the epistemology that we're dealing with. And particularly, we're going to look at the difference between realism and pragmatism. So, realism is essentially the philosophy, the epistemological worldview that the majority of human beings in the modern world subscribe to. And what realism is, it's basically this, it's very similar to materialism or naturalism, in the sense that it's just this idea that we are human beings, we are these conscious beings, and we're separate from the rest of the outside world, and that there's objective facts about the world, and that we can figure those facts out, and that those facts are true irrespective of whether or not we do figure them out, or whether our perceptions of them might be, wrong or slightly inaccurate or whatever. It doesn't matter. There's an objective world, then there's us, and the goal of realism, even though there's not really a goal that's associated with the philosophy, the worldview. In this case, it tends to be the goal of the realist to figure out what is real, what is true, what is objectively accurate about our world, and that is the best, most logical, rational way to live, as opposed to just a lot of for instance, atheists are realists, and they believe that this idea that these deities exist outside of what we can perceive and where we can gather evidence is illogical, irrational way to view the world. So that's kind of, it can be a little bit more complicated than that. You can definitely go deeper, but that's kind of a basic idea of what realism is. Now, pragmatism, which is not the same as realism, and it's the philosophy that I personally subscribe to, so I'm a little bit biased in this case. Pragmatism is this idea that whatever is true about the world is not what there's evidence of, or what we can determine is objectively true through empiricism or any other sort of methods that we can use to fact check our understanding of reality. But what pragmatism is it's simply the idea that what's true is what works, what gets the desired result, what allows human beings to continue on living, and for society to not collapse, and for me to, as an individual, to accomplish the goals that I want to accomplish. And you might think that, well, aren't those two things just the same though? Wouldn't understanding the objective world and how it works, give you the best chances of accomplishing your goals? Wouldn't being deluded about the world, be a downside? How could being delusional about the objective world benefit you? And it seems like that, but it's not always the case. Sometimes being delusional, from a realist perspective, is actually the best thing that you can be from a pragmatic perspective. So I'll give you an example, okay? We all have probably had experiences in our lives where we felt kind of insecure, low self-esteem, shy, not really wanting to speak up, maybe not wanting to go talk to that attractive person that we see at the party or in the street or whatever. And we've all probably had also moments where we felt confident and we felt like we were worthy and like we were even out of that person's league, right? And then when we went up and talked to them, it sort of just seemed effortless and it flowed and they reciprocated our attraction and it went wonderfully. And that was because of your mindset, right? You felt confident and that gave you the courage to go and express yourself and be your true self, and that caused the attraction. Whereas when you were feeling low self-esteem, you don't even have the courage to go talk to the person in the first place. Now, let's say that you're trying to become better at dating or better at public speaking or better at sales or any sort of situation where confidence is crucial. Well, if you have had a bunch of experiences where you were rejected or you were, looked down upon, or you were unsuccessful in public speaking or dating or sales or anything, then the logical thing to assume is that you must not be good enough. There must be something wrong with you. You must not be a confident person, right? That's what the evidence shows. With 90% of the instances in the past where you had to go and, public speak, you failed. And so the logical thing to assume is that you will fail in the future. That's what the evidence indicates. However, if you were to become delusional and you were to completely become convinced that all of those past failures were actually successes, even though you got booed and they threw the fucking tomatoes at you, and it was just like the worst, most humiliating thing. You were on the internet, you went viral. But if you genuinely believe that those were successes, then you would feel confident and it would make you more likely to be successful in the future. So that's just one example of how, focusing on the facts and the objective reality is not always the most useful, utilitarian, pragmatic thing to do. And so realism and pragmatism are not the same thing. They're palpably not the same, even though they do cross over in a lot of areas. So let's go back to this thing about victims, right? So from a pragmatic perspective, the idea of being a victim just doesn't exist at all. There is no such thing. The reason why I use the Nazis is because that's the quintessential example of these people were just rounded up, put into concentration camps, tortured, and then murdered on a mass scale. You can't get to a more, there's no bigger victim than that, right? But from a pragmatic perspective, the idea of being a victimhood doesn't even exist. There is no such thing as a victim, and I'll tell you why. When you're a victim, basically, to say someone's a victim is to say that they were basically forced into something negative, usually negative, although you could, use the word victim to mean somebody was kind of forced, victimized by something positive, but usually it's negative. It's to say that they were forced into something negative against their will. They had no control over it, right? So it's different from if I walk into a lion's den knowing that there's lions and that they are hungry and haven't eaten in months. In that case, I'm not really a victim. I did that to myself, right? Whereas if the Nazis come and just round me up against my will, then I'm a victim, right? And it's a reasonable distinction to make. However, it's not a pragmatic one, because when I'm the victim, basically I'm giving away my power, right? In the lion example, even though I have to take responsibility for my stupid decisions, assuming that I, escape the lions alive, I have the power to make a different decision in the future. Because I'm not going to change the fact that lions want to kill people and eat them. There's nothing I can do about that fact that lions are dangerous. Lions are dangerous. Unless I'm going to go and kill every single lion on the planet, which is impossible, then I'm not going to change the fact that lions are a threat. But I can change my behavior to make myself less likely to encounter lions. But if I just viewed myself as a victim and I thought, oh my God, I was just minding my own business, I just wanted to go into that cave and the lions just, they attacked me. There's nothing I could have done. They just wanted to kill me and eat me. Well, then I give away my power to make a different decision, a better decision, a more pragmatic decision in the future. And let's take this back to the Nazi example, right? As a Jewish person who's a victim of the Nazis, I could say that I'm the victim, and that would be true in a sense because I was forced against my will. But then what I do is I give my power away to avoid similar situations in the future. So if I just say, oh my God, there's nothing I could have done, the Nazis just came out of nowhere, they rounded me up one day, they forced me into these camps, and there was nothing I could do about it. Well then, if I don't play the victim and I say, well, what could I possibly have done to prevent this? Well then if I escape the Nazi concentration camp alive, then maybe now I'm paying attention to civil unrest. Maybe I'm paying attention to the politics and I'm noticing the signs that genocide is coming or oppression is coming, and then I can flee the country before everyone gets rounded up and the genocide is committed, right? And so it may seem insensitive to say that Jewish people in the Holocaust shouldn't play the victim, but the problem is that if they play the victim, they're sure to be victimized again. But if they take full responsibility and say, it's my fault, I didn't pay attention to the red flags, the society was going downhill and I stuck around and I didn't get my family out, they take responsibility for that, even though it's not really their fault. But if they just take responsibility anyway, then the result is it doesn't happen to them again because they take necessary precautions. So we can argue about, well, it's insensitive, it's this, it's that, and it's not that I don't agree with that. Like the Jewish people who are in those concentration camps and their families are victims of atrocity. There's no doubt about that. But if you just totally take responsibility for everything in your life, you give yourself the power to change it, because you can't change what other people do. All right, I'll give you another really, really controversial example. A lot of you guys are gonna hate me for this, but let's talk about victims of rape, right? There's a lot of rhetoric right now about anti-victim shaming. Basically, there's all this idea about, well, nobody deserves to get raped. They can get as drunk as they want and wear whatever they want and be as sexual as they want, and they shouldn't have to worry about getting raped. And I completely agree with that. Let's get this straight. There is no excuse to rape somebody. That's not what this video is about. Again, it's not about the ethics. This video has nothing to do with ethics. But if, as a woman, if I play the victim, even if I am a victim, genuinely, then I basically give away my power to avoid getting victimized by a sexual predator in the future. Okay? And it's for the same reason that we can't go and kill every last lion. Well, there is no way to get rid of all the rapists. I mean, there is, first of all, there's no way there's people who have never committed a sexual crime, but who are going to in the future. And there's no way to test people and be like, oh, well, this person, we can't take a DNA sample and be like, oh, they're going to be a rapist someday. You can't do that. So identifying them is the first problem. At least with the lions, we know. We know the difference between what is a lion and what's not. It's sometimes hard to tell the difference between a rapist and a non-rapist. So identifying them is a huge problem. And then the ethics of, genocide on a group of people who haven't even committed any crimes yet, even if you could identify them, that's questionable too. And it's just the logistics of it, it's just impossible. You're not going to get rid of all the rapists. You're not going to get rid of all the bad people in the world. Getting raped, especially as a woman, although it is a threat to men too, but as a woman, it is a threat. It is something that you have to be at least somewhat concerned about. It's just the way the world is. And I wish it wasn't that way. And when people do commit sexual crimes, hopefully they're put in jail and they're taken off the street and not allowed to offend again. But unfortunately, they're not all going to be in jail. There's going to be a lot of dangerous people on the streets, and there's nothing we can do about that. So, if the woman takes full responsibility and says, if I get raped, that's my fault, well, now she has the power to take precautions. So, even though she has the complete and utter right to get as drunk as she wants, anywhere she wants, and not get raped, that's not necessarily realistic. So if the woman takes the precaution of, well, maybe I shouldn't get blackout drunk at a house party, a stranger's house party, where there's a bunch of frat boys, right? Maybe I should avoid that, right? And while it's unfortunate that women have to worry about that, the end result is that they don't get taken advantage of while they're passed out drunk by some random frat boy, right? Because they took the precautions. And here's the other thing too, is that as a woman or anybody, you can choose to not take the precautions, right? Taking responsibility doesn't mean that you all of a sudden now you have to take all these precautions and watch what you wear and watch how much you drink and where you're going and keep these pepper spray on you. You don't have to do those things. But by taking responsibility, you give yourself the power to choose which precautions you want to take and how serious you want to be about those. Now you have the power. But when you're a victim, oh my God, I was just minding my own business and this guy just raped me. Now you have absolutely no power. You can just be victimized at any point. And so, from a pragmatic perspective, playing the victim is never, ever pragmatic, because as the victim, you basically give away all of your ability to change the situation or to prevent it from happening again in the future. And it doesn't really matter what the situation is. Being the victim is never useful. Taking responsibility always gives you the best chance at survival, because you can only change how you deal with situations and how you live your life and how you approach things. You can't change the fact that there's bad people in the world or that other people are going to make horrible decisions and do terrible things. You can't change that. Now, if you want to, protest and, you want to make it a goal to educate, young men, for instance, in the sexual assault example, you want to educate young men on consent and on respecting women's boundaries so that you can reduce the number of bad people in the world. Like, that's your prerogative. Go ahead and do that. I think that is a fantastic endeavor. It's a fantastic goal. But you can't expect that that's just going to solve the problem. Right? That will work on some people, but then there's psychopaths who don't give a shit about your consent training. They're like, fuck that, I'm just going to do what I want. And so responsibility is still the most pragmatic way to live. So hopefully this kind of cleared things up for you and kind of you explained why there's these certain people that are just so against the victim mentality, and then there's other people who are like, well, no, we're victim shaming, we can't do that. These people are victims, we have to respect that, we have to respect their trauma, and how there's this contention. And it seems like why can't people just agree on it? Well, it's because some people are looking at it pragmatically and some people are looking at it realistically. And realistically, people who are victims of rape and people who are victims of, the Nazis are victims. But pragmatically, they're not. And so that's really the key here. It's really up to you. Do you want to be the victim? Which maybe you do. That's the thing, is that being the victim has its benefits. Then, because for something bad to happen to you or to other people, and for you to have that blame on you, that guilt and that shame is devastating. Like, people who play the victim, look, I'm not here to say that people that play the victim are just, pathetic people who don't want to take responsibility and they should stop playing the victim. Like, I fully understand why people play the victim, and I've done it before, and it has its benefits. It has tremendous benefits. It can help you heal your trauma. Sometimes you have to go through a stage of being the victim in order to heal from your trauma. I'm not saying that playing the victim is just this horrible, useless thing that nobody should ever do. All I'm saying is that you have a choice. And it doesn't have to be based on facts. It can just be based on getting the result that you want out of life. So hopefully now you're able to make that decision from a place of knowledge.